Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. The Killer Women Vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with over 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Jillian Medoff. Jillian's fifth novel, When We Were Bright and Beautiful, is a story about privilege, power, consent, and dirty, sexy money. It garnered many accolades. It was a Book of the Month Club selection, an Apple Books Best of the Month, an Audible Editor's Pick, a People Pick of the Week, a Town and Country Magazine, an O Daily Favorite, and a Publishers Marketplace Buzz Book, among others. She is the author, very, very well received book, and for good reason. Jillian is the author of 4 other novels, including the national bestseller, I Couldn't Love You More, the acclaimed workplace novel, This Could Hurt, and Hunger Point, which was made into an original Lifetime movie starring Christina, Hendricks, and Barbara Hershey, and directed by Joan Micklin Silver in 2003. A former fellow at MacDowell, Blue Mountain Center and VCCA, Jillian has an MFA from NYU. She studied with Mona Simpson, her thesis advisor, and Jonathan Dee, and took master classes with Toni Morrison, Grace Paley, and Joyce Carol Oates. In addition to writing novels, Jillian has a long career in corporate consulting. Since her early days at Max Factor and American Home Goods, she's worked for a wide range of employers, including Deloitte and Aon. Now with Segal Benz, she advises clients on communication strategies for all aspects of the employee experience. Jillian lives with her husband, Keith Dawson, and 3 adult daughters who come and go. She reviews novels for the New York Times Book Review and is currently working on a new book called The Committee, a story about medical ethics and race in Seattle circa 1961. Wow. Jillian, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm very, very flattered you asked.
I read this and I literally was like, the way Jillian and I came together is that I posted this beautiful book on Instagram and was like, I want Jillian Medoff on Killer Women. And she responded, which is such a treat for me too, because this book, wow. So first, tell our listeners a little bit about When We Were Bright and Beautiful.
Well, When We Were Bright and Beautiful is the story of a family that unravels in the wake of the youngest son, his accusation for rape. But the story is told by his sister, Cassie, who is 23 and who is in graduate school and who races home when she hears the news. And she's telling you the story of an ostensible crime. But when you come to the end of the book, you realize she's actually telling you about 2 crimes, and she is the victim of one of them. So it's got a lot of twists.
It does. It's very twisty. And okay, so can you talk about the seed for this story?
Oh, sure. My book before this one, my 4th book, was a workplace novel, and it was really overly engineered. The structure was very complicated. And I said, oh, you know what? I really want to write a story, like a dark kind of noir story. But as I started getting into it, and it was originally set in the Valmont. So the Valmont, which is a luxury hotel, it was the first character. And in my mind, it started out to be like an upstairs, downstairs set in the 21st century. So it was kind of looking at the upstairs families like Downton Abbey, and then the staff that service them. And so it was going to be the original crime, and there was never any crime in any of my books ever. But I thought, the original crime was parenting, because I thought if it kicked off with a kidnapping and then everybody sort of commented on it, I could talk about how judgmental we are, about parents, and then align certain characters with other characters. So the original seed for this book, and this is how I start, which is really with an image or like a line of dialogue. It was a 6-year-old girl is being ferried to school in a town car by herself. She waves, it waves out the back window, and the doorman is watching her, and he waves too. She never shows up at school. And so he realizes that she wasn't waving goodbye, she was calling for help. And so her mother was on trial for negligence. But, there just wasn't enough to sustain me for, like, it takes me between 5 and 7 years to write a novel. And it just wasn't interesting enough. And it was completely implausible, just the trial that I wanted to have. So Cassie grew up. She's now 23. Her mother is still the heiress, but I really winnowed down all the characters and focused on this one family. And as I got very deep into the family dynamics, I started understanding them on a real, like a cellular level. And that was the story I decided to tell.
I
But
love
that
it.
was oh, I'm sorry.
That was the same little girl. So in your mind, Cassie was the little girl who was getting kidnapped, and now she's a young woman. Is that sort of
Exactly
the course of figuring out the book? Well, so one of the things I love so much about this book is from the very first pages, the way that Cassie reflects kind of unapologetically on her wealth and the power that it gives them. I mean, she's sensitive to it because she also has a relationship, for instance, with the doorman at the building. But it so encapsulates that world. And you do such a wonderful job, I think, of really depicting what it is like for people who have that much money, right?
Thank you.
And Cassie has her own sort of money from a different source too, which is a part of the plot that's super interesting.
Right. So the way that I work really is, I knew somehow that there was something wrong with Cassie, even when she was 6 and an original character. And so the way that I approached the book was as sort of investigation, like really what's going on with her, and why am I obsessed with her? Why am I interested in this? What is happening within the 4 walls that these families live in that is going to be interesting to sustain me for 5 years, but also I can explore areas and issues that I am just completely obsessed by. So one is wealth. And I find it sort of paradoxical that, as an American and on the internet, I am just fascinated by images of yachts and I mean, the Succession, Gossip Girl, all those kinds of closed communities. And as a writer, I have always been interested in closed communities where they have their own language and they have their, like football teams or fraternities or sororities, prisons. I just find all of the details so fascinating. So I was really interested in the lives of the wealthy. And I think what's paradoxical is at the same time that Americans or people, all over the world are sort of fascinated by wealth, there's also like a distaste for it, right? And I didn't expect, and I really don't believe that I'm an apologist for the wealthy. Like I wasn't trying to make people sympathetic to them, but I did want to posit the idea that we are, we contain multitudes, even the wealthy. And if you live in that world, it for some, especially children, it can be a trap. It's a cage. She's like, I am following a certain path that has been chosen for me.
Right.
And I just, it's a beautiful life, but it's also, it's suffocating. And she talks about her brother, her elder brother, who is aimless and doesn't really, he flunks out of school. He can't hold down a job. And, you would think of him as sort of a privileged playboy, but what she says is that, he doesn't need a job because he needs the money, but he needs a job because he needs a life. Like he needs a purpose.
Right.
And what I find so fascinating is how people are so quick to find them unlikable. And I'm really trying to understand what's unlikable about them. The fact that they have money and aren't apologetic about it, that they don't give enough to, like, what is it that is it, and so that is kind of what I was exploring as I was writing the book.
Well, and it's interesting because I think I have two thoughts. One is that I think that the distaste we feel for them is this idea of it's born of envy. We're envious, of course, because it looks on the outside so easy. If you can just buy anything you want, life should be easy. And so they have nothing. They're not allowed to have anything to complain about. They should for sure be way more generous than they are. But we know also the stories of how complicated that can be. If you're the wealthy one, everybody's calling you all the time for, help me with this project or do this for me. And it's the idea of it being a trap resonates with me. I think that is such a valid and true statement. The other thing that's interesting about it, and Cassie is a perfect example of this, is that when your family, that's your family, when they call you, Cassie has to drop everything. She doesn't, even being in graduate school, whatever, she's 50, 75 miles away, she doesn't really have autonomy.
No.
They call her and she is expected to return to support this, the family in crisis. And I think that's another thing that I think is very true of wealthy families, is that the money means somebody has their thumb on you all the time. Right?
Oh yeah. And then how far does that loyalty go? Like, like, what are your responsibilities to the family? What do you owe? And I think that is true of any family in the world. I mean, there's implicit messages, and in wealthy families, if they have a family business, are you expected to go into it? Are you So there's all kinds of strands that I wanted to untangle, but I also wanted to exploit. Like I knew going in on some level that it is provocative to say, oh, Cassie, you have to come, something awful happened to Billy. And he's, the one who is being charged with a crime.
Right.
But one of the things that happened, and this is kind of it's just sort of I'm kind of a dope, but as I was writing the book over the years, and it took me a long time, because I have a regular job.
Yeah.
But I changed the crime from kidnapping to sexual assault in, I guess it was like 2015. And then in 2017, the world explodes with Me Too.
Right.
And I'm like, oh God, I'm going to have to change the crime again, because I knew I wasn't going to finish the book for another couple of years. And then you have to sell it and all that. And so I'm like, I didn't want this book to sort of I figured by the time it's 2022, 23, there's going to be a shitload of Me Too books. We're going to have looked at the issues from lots of different angles. So what can I bring to the conversation? Like, how can I elevate this issue? And I think one of the things that we haven't seen a lot is the debilitating consequences on survivors and victims. Like, in many ways, our reading community expects a little bit more of a formulaic response to sexual violence, where you have a sympathetic and easily likable main character or survivor, a redemptive arc. And that wasn't really the story that I was interested in. And so I went into the book, and this is where I was kind of an idiot, where I knew that it was provocative a way to start, but I also knew that this was my 5th book. And if you're like, okay, if you stay with me, you'll see that there 100 pages, there'll be a reveal, and then 100 pages, there'll be a reveal. And then there will be a final reveal that will ultimately illustrate the entire project, and you'll see. So just stay with me. I know what I'm doing. But I was so in my own head. Most people, I'm not a brand name. Nobody knows who I am. For
well,
many
they do
people,
now.
This is my first book. So they're like,
Yeah.
it's so comical when you get into your own world. It's like, nobody knows who the hell you are. Like, so like,
well, I mean, you've done. I think everything you did. It's funny that you were thinking so much about that Me Too movement, and it makes sense, like you said, because your projects take a long, it's a long time from start to finish. One of the things I think about your comment about what we want from a Me Too story, and the sort of, is that right now we're still digesting all the sort of the process, all these traumas, and for us as for those of us who are observers, it's much more palatable to have it all tied up at the end, and to think, okay, well, he got his punishment, and she's redeemed, and so now everything is over, which of course is not at all realistic. But for us to dig deeper into sort of the lasting ramifications of these situations is a lot when we're early in the stage. There's so much more to excavate. But one of the things I love about this book is that you are starting this whole thing from the opposite side of where all the Me Too books are starting, which is to say that we are worried about Billy. We are, rooting for him. We are basically the point of view of the rapist sister, and we have empathy for
ostensible.
Yes,
accused
sorry.
rapist.
Apologies. Of course,
Right.
alleged rapist.
Alleged, right?
That's right. So we're in the point of view. So we are looking at this from a side that really, I haven't personally read anything that is on this side of the story, which I also think is really interesting, because it makes us think a lot more about, of course we're all behind the women, we take their side, but it does raise the question, well, what if you weren't, what if you were the sister of this alleged rapist? What if you did know this person well enough to think exactly what he is or is not capable of? And that is super interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was what was interesting to me too. And excuse the pun, but it's like, what if the worst thing happened to your family? Like, and you were telling the story, and I truly believe, and as I was writing the book, that Cassie and Billy and Nate, the 3 siblings, they loved each other, and they had a childhood that, yes, it was grand and glorious, but it was really about the connection that she felt to both of them. And I think that's true whether you have money or not, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's about the inner lives of the people you live with, and feeling like them and you are of them.
Right.
And sometimes those kinds of families that are so close knit, they have they expect and demand things of you that are more than you can give. But it's like, I think this story, despite the wealth, it's true of any family in some way, because to me, the story really is about consciousness. It's about coming into awareness from everything you knew implicitly, but didn't, like, you knew, but you didn't know.
Right.
And that was not acknowledged in a family.
Right.
To when the end of the book, or at the end of the story, the end of whatever, where you come into consciousness and awareness, and things that were never spoken about are suddenly on the table and acknowledged. And I hadn't seen that done before in a lot of ways, but I also kind of thought that the book was going to be a smaller book, because it is so interior, and I didn't expect the Book of the Month Club pick, but I also didn't expect there's a lot of polarized readers. A lot of readers are, I hate this family. And I'm kind of
Right.
like, oh, that's so interesting. Like I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and so I am a career novelist, which means I am always trying to learn something new. And I mean, I read reviews from the time I was a kid, and I always want to understand, like, well, maybe I missed this, or so I read reviews all the time, which I know is very contrary to a lot of my writer friends, that they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, because it's a craft. I want to get better, right? I want to learn what I'm not doing as well as I could be. And in that sense, it was pretty eye-opening. But I don't know. I think when I was younger, I would get bad reviews, or people would say things to me that were so disturbing, and I would have to lie down. Like it would
Yeah.
take me days to recover.
Right. Right.
But each of my books is very different. And with this one, I'm actually more confident about the direction the book took, and the way that I illustrated these issues that I wanted to explore.
Yeah.
I'm more confident than I have been in any of my other books. But maybe here's the question: a couple of years from now, will I look back and say, "Oh, I could have done this differently"? Or it's a fascinating thing.
I know,
So,
but we can't revise our own books. I mean, you've been
oh,
at
I
this
know.
25 years. What this doesn't do, that sounds really scary. But I also think it's interesting because I think oftentimes a polarizing book is the most interesting type, right? Because you've obviously raised a lot of hackles. People are like, they are responding very much to the story, to the situation, to the privilege. But I
To the
also think
issue.
to the issue, but I also think our job as readers, right, is to I think our job, and also the gift of a book, is to put ourselves in that person's, whether in this case, Cassie, Billy, Nate, in their
Mm-hmm.
shoes for a moment and feel
Oh, people don't like
right.
that.
No, they
People don't
don't.
know.
No, of
No,
course they don't, which is
no.
why our world is so polarized. But
Right.
which is also why it's so important that we do it. And I think, and all these, there's really this book is really those five people, right? The three kids and the two
Right.
parents. And at moments in the book, I felt each of those people. And at the end of the book, there was some discomfort with having spent some time appreciating
Right.
those people. But I think, to the point of your other writer friends, and I'm in that boat too, so much of the reviews are just, I don't find that helpful.
No,
you
no,
know?
no. I know. And the truth is, and this is a very true statement. I don't really write for readers, and I never had.
Right.
And it's almost, it's been, my course has been to always have a job, so that I can write the kinds of books I want.
Mm,
And having been in the industry for so many years, I have seen lots of trends, and not having to capitulate because I needed to sell something. I was always
yes.
able to take whatever time I needed to write a book, and learn how to make it better, and learn how to exploit my own talents in a way that the book becomes more of a piece of art, or
Yes.
as opposed to just a throwaway thing I did on the side to make money. And
Right.
so my career has been very much, it's been like, as I said, each of my books is different. But one thing I know has happened is that I've reached for more compelling issues, or more structural complexity. You know what I mean? Like each book, I
Yes.
try to do something to teach myself, because really the way to learn how to write a book is to write a book,
Right.
right?
Right. Well, and let's talk about your career, because you have a fabulous Instagram post. I'm like when I try to get to know somebody, I'm always like digging through their posts, which I guess is kind of what we all do. But you have this an Instagram post, because you're talking about your five books, which, as you said, it's sort of a 25-year career. And I think a lot of people who are aspiring to publish a book or write a book think about, well, once you hit it, like, if you hit it, if you make it, then you've made it. And it's all sort of downhill, easy riding from there. And your career,
Oh my God.
I know, but your post is so. The other thing I really appreciate is the honesty, because I feel like we I don't ever smoke. A lot of what we do is smoke and mirrors because it has to be, and you can't really divulge everything in your life. But when people post honestly, and that post is really honest, and it talks about sort of your 5 books, and if I can remember them correctly, the first, you had a big debut,
I had a
right?
big debut.
And then you had, talk about
flop.
a big flop, which I find it hard to believe. This is my first Jillian Medoff book, so I'll have to go back and decide if but it's so you had a big debut, then a big flop, and then you had
and then I came back. Well, I'll tell you the
please.
succession, right?
Yes.
So I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but it's not even that I knew I wanted to do it. It's just, that's what I did. Like from the time I was 5 or 6, right? We moved a lot, 17 times by the time I was 17. I was raised to be, very nice, always be nice, always think of other people. Don't put your feelings first because that's selfish. And I had a lot of, suppressed anxiety and anger and sadness and joy too. But it's like when you're always the new kid, you just kind of go along with the crowd. And so I started writing very young, but I didn't come from a family of artists or writers or, I was like, I'm going to be a middle manager in a corporate job, and that would be perfectly fine. But people in my family would ask, are you going to go into journalism or advertising, pretty very heavily writer jobs. And right. I'm like, no, I want to write stories, but
right.
It's like so dumb. They were like, that's crazy. But I ended up always working and writing simultaneously. And I had a job. I came up to New York. I went to college in New York City. I went home for a few years, and then I came back to go to graduate school. And NYU had an evening program, like it was their MFA program was at night. And so you could go to work during the day and work at night, which is what I thought people did, right? I didn't know anyone who could just be a writer.
Right.
And
especially in New York.
Especially in New York. So I was in corporate marketing and then communications all through all these years. But I never imagined being confident enough, which is another thing, to be able to write a whole book. But in graduate school, I was, encouraged. My graduate advisor was Mona Simpson. I only applied to one graduate school because some guy that I was dating was going overseas to open a real estate office in Paris. He's like, well, I'm going to go alone. I said, well, that's okay. I'm going to grad school. I hadn't even applied. So I scrambled to apply, and I loved Mona Simpson's books. I really did. And then she became my thesis advisor. And then I sold that book for lots of money and a big movie deal. And I'm like, wow, the life of the writer's not so bad, right? I mean, come on. And then the book came out and it did okay. Not, it never hit any bestseller lists, but then the movie came out, and then I wrote a second book that my agent couldn't sell. So I wrote a third book that was about 7 women in group therapy, and it was about women's anger. And it was a big old flop. And it wasn't so much that people didn't want to talk about women's anger. I think the book, it just wasn't clear that it was Black comedy, because then it was some earnestness in it, whatever. It didn't sell. And then it took me another, 8 years, almost 10 years to sell something new. And it was really hard because I had an agent who wasn't really understanding like what I was trying to do. And I was writing stuff she couldn't sell, and she could sell stuff that I didn't want to write. It was just complicated. And I wrote another book that was rejected by, 28 publishers. It was just heartbreaking. But thank God I had my job, right?
Yes,
because I was
right.
at least able to sustain a life. And then my third book came out in 2012 as a paperback original. And that book was my bestseller, at that point. So, but because it had a lower price point, it did really well. And then my fourth book was like, okay, you know what? I have been shoved into, women's fiction, funny women's fiction, literary funny women's fiction. Like, I'm just going to write a book I want to write about work. And so it was my best reviewed book, came out in 2018. I was so proud of it. And that sold like 5 copies. You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? So far it was big debut, big flop, big sales, big reviews, and then big deal, which was this one. But so I can honestly say, with all truth and authenticity, that being a writer is, it's a crapshoot. And you have to, I don't necessarily love the act of writing. I love having written. But from the time I was 6 years old, it's been a place for me to organize my thoughts or work out issues. I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily write for readers. I don't write what might be saleable at the time. I remember when I was working on, around the time of my first book, there was a big push. Memoirs like exploded. And everyone I knew was writing personal essays or, memoirs. And then that bar got so high,
Right.
And it was also, I'm just not that interesting a person. Like, I haven't had crazy things happen to me. I'm just like, yeah, I moved a lot and I have a job and I write books, but I'm not that interesting. I'm just random.
I mean, actually, I'm sure you have a memoir in you, but it doesn't interest you. So that, that's right. I mean, to spend a year on a book, I think you are 100% right. You've got to find the thing that you want to spend, because those people are with you kind of 24/7, even if you're not writing, because you're thinking about them. It's like managing. I always explain it to my children. It's sort of like, it's like I have another family, and I love you. I love you guys the most, and I'm here for you first. But when I get that weird look in my, on my face, it's because I'm thinking about that other family. It's interesting. So when you had those experiences where you had the big deal, there was no part of you that's like, well, now it makes sense to quit my job. You were like, no,
because I grew up in a family that was financially challenged at every turn. Sometimes there might be years where we were flush, but that was always, just to hoard money because there'd be a downturn. My dad was in sales and the market was very, there's just no guarantees. And I said, the only thing that I can do really well is work. I am a workhorse. And I guess it goes back to my mother saying, you should do for other people, because I am in service. Like I feel best when I've accomplished something. And whether that's my job or my books, it feels really, I feel solid. I feel like, okay, you know what, I'm contributing. But I don't know if there is a number that I could get to make me walk away, and I love Segal Benz. I mean, Segal Benz is the company I've been working for 10 years, and we do, very corporate communications campaigns for employee benefits, stock plans, medical plans, whatever. And it's really dry, but I really believe that there is, honor in work, and which is kind of earnest and cheesy, but I believe it. I feel like even the most dry actuary at my company has a story to tell, And so I don't know.
You get, with a job, you get feedback, whether it's a paycheck or, a good job today, or this looks great, that you never get in the middle of a novel. I mean, you just don't, you don't get it. I mean, maybe you get it a little from a critique partner, but it comes with all this, well, do they really know? There's so much doubt in that process. So I do feel like that is invaluable. That amount of sort of confidence, I'm good at this, I can do this, I can be rewarded for this. And then if this other thing doesn't work out, right? Or if it takes a bunch of years for it to work out, then that's okay, because I have this thing. But on that point, you have 3 kids. I mean, your 3 grown daughters, they're grown-ups, but still, like, how in the world have you balanced this, all of these pieces of your life? Because that's a real challenge.
Yeah, no, it is. And the thing about writing, and it's, even when you're a published novelist, just to make a point, I am rejected in some way every day. There is something that I am not getting, whether it's more money, whether it's a review in a certain publication, a fellowship. There's some way that there is someone always more talented, that better sold, better marketed, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And so it's been trying to find peace too over the course of 25 years, to say, okay, well, this is what I'm good at, this is the kind of book I write, and to be okay with it. I think for me, the way that I've been able to balance everything is that I started writing very young, and so I started developing habits really young. Like, I understand how I approach novels. I've learned shortcuts. But I also started. So I started working and writing very early, but I didn't come to family life until I was in my late 30s. So when I met my now husband, I was like 37, and he came with 2 kids. So that, that was already like instant family. And then we had another daughter. And so she's 20 now, or she'll be 20 next week. But
happy birthday.
Yeah, right, Molly. But it was, in the beginning, it was like a tidal wave with kids.
Yes.
I mean, it was, I never experienced anything like the lack of sleep. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then 3 girls. So there's always drama. Like, someone's always left out. And I also have 2 sisters. So I know about all the girls. But the good thing is that, having already, like, I sold my first book when I was 33, but I started writing it, when I was 27 or so. And so I had 10 years of good writing habits before. So I don't write every day. And I take notes a lot. But I do, when I'm scheduled to write, because I stopped after I did sell my first book, I did go down to 4 days a week. Okay. So I always had a day. So that is
great.
Okay. So let's just put it out there. I'm not working 5 days, unless it's busy season, and then I work 5 days. But then, so when I'm scheduled to work, I will sit down and work, even if I don't feel like it, I'll push myself, even if it's only for 20 minutes, because I always feel better as I'm writing. It's just getting started.
Right.
And
it's like exercise.
It is, right. You just gotta, and you're not always going to find the muse, but you've got to acknowledge that this is the writing time. And over the years, remember, I have been doing, working for 30 years, maybe, and I've been writing for just as long. And I've trained myself to go back and forth between how deep a dive I have to be, like how granular I have to get. So for instance, I always try early on in a project to get the architecture, to get the structure down, because it's hard to see an overarching structure when you're doing an hour at a time, or when I'm on my lunch hour, or when I'm stealing time, when the kids, after they went to bed, I'd be, once I have the structure down and the characters start to talk, that is my in, because dialogue is it's one of my skills. I'm not as good at all with landscape. Like, I will never, ever describe the forest. there's trees, it's brown and green, and that's about it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right. Let the reader fill that in. Yes.
right. But I mean, I read books a lot about describing the ocean and the the landscape, and I'm very, very, I admire it very much, but I'm never going to do it. Right. So once characters start talking, and the deeper I get in to know them, then the story starts to emerge. And that's really it, where I don't come to the story knowing it. It is revealed to me. And that's why my first drafts take so long, you know.
Right. And so do you find that during, like you said, you might steal an hour during a work, your lunchtime or at night. So if you think about, if I imagine writing sort of having one dedicated work day a week, how do you maintain that thread? I mean, how do you sort of, it's like talking to a friend once a week, right? You lose track of all the things happening until you talk to them again. So, what's your sort of, because I think there's a lot of people, and my first 4 books were written while I was working full time. I had, my daughter was born when, she's 20, almost 23, and she was 8 months old when my first book came out. So, I've done sort of something similar, although I would say that I couldn't manage it. So I had to quit. But, how do you sort of keep that thread going over the course of the periods when you're, the days when you're not working on the book?
Well, when I was younger, I couldn't. I mean, it was hard. Like, I would have to go in Thursday nights and, really reacquaint myself. And then Friday, a lot of time would be spent catching up. But then I started training myself to, look at it every few days, then start, do an hour a day or every other day, whatever it took to get deeper into the story. And then after a period of time, when it really it grips me, I will do it anywhere, anytime.
Yes.
I mean, I have plugged my computer into the one outlet in ICANN Stadium in the Bronx when my daughter was like running track.
Right.
And, there's so much downtime between the events. I'd be like, all right, well, I'll wait for until your event. I'm just going to sit up there. I'd sit on the floor and I would work. I'd work in the front seat of a car. I'd work in the back seat of a car. I would work anywhere. And that's when it's really gripping me,
Right.
That's when I'm like, and that's when I have to get it right. That's when it's like, okay, I've got to get this right. I've got to get this right. And it becomes all consuming. And the other thing I did is I'm fairly senior at my job, but not, I should be running a department or, much higher up, but I don't I keep myself at a certain, I can earn money and I feel good about my job. I'm not so high up that I have people reporting to me. I've always, so
kept yourself so that you
I've always kept myself at a certain level so that my responsibilities were, they were manageable. I mean, I go through this, oh my God, every couple of years, I'm like, should I go for vice president? Should I run that race? Should I do that? And then, it's like, then I'll be getting the grips of a book and I'm like, no. And then the book will come out and there's always a sorrowful kind of aftermath, right? After the book comes out.
Right.
Like,
postpartum depression.
Postpartum. I need to go. I'm going to be a vice president. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But,
well, I think that's actually a lesson that I think most of us aren't accustomed to, which is the idea that you're protecting that part, that time, which nobody's clamoring for. Nobody's at the computer going, what about me? The book, but you are saying, like, if I had to take my job home with me, if I was in charge of people, if I was going to be on call all the time, if I was going to be CEO, then that doesn't allow that space that you need for your writing. And I think that's really valuable because that is so un-American. we are not used to, saying, no, I don't want to be at the top. And I think it's so smart. I think it's so smart.
Well, I was also lucky. And I'm going to say this, that, I was lucky because when my first book came out, I was 33. And so I was writing a novel and not haikus or short story, right?
Right.
I was writing funny and sad at the same time, which wasn't really a big thing back then. You know, you had to be funny or sad, and you know, kind of combining them in 1997. I don't know, what is this supposed to be? I was female, and you know, there was a market for. I was writing in first person, so there was a market for quote unquote authentic, honest female voices. And I, you know, I'm white, and at the you know, no, but I mean, come on,
Right.
it's a privilege, and
Oh,
I accept that,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So there were things that I got lucky, and then
Yeah.
I learned how to exploit that luck.
Yeah.
Like for instance, after my first novel came out, I was inundated with requests for a young adult book with the same character, and I'm like, okay,
Interesting.
no, she exists in this book. And I, you know, or movie scripts, like write the movie. And I mean, this was before the YA market exploded. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
maybe I could have made more money, but my feeling was always like, I just spent 5 or 6 years with these people. I am so done. Like, I don't want to talk about them anymore. I don't want, like, I need to move on. And that even happened with this book, where my agent's like, do you want to be involved in the film? You know, executive editor, whatever, executive producer. And I'm like, oh God, no. You know, I'm done. I'm like already, I've moved on a year and a half ago, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So,
Well, that's, I mean, again, knowing yourself, you know yourself really well.
Right. Well, I sort of went back and forth, but then at the end, I am at a point where, yes, I know what I can tolerate and what I can't. And I just had to move on. So I think being able to develop habits and sticking to them, it helped that I got lucky early on and that my first book came out. And I think also because my books were for me as opposed to for readers during that long, hard stretch of 10 years of rejection and rejection and rejection and no sales and big flops, and I had a place to go to express all this, and I just happened to write novels about, you know, but I think that there has to be a part of me, and I think a part of a lot of people who want to create art, that you have to believe you can do it, or if you don't know, you have to believe that it's worth the attempt, you know?
Absolutely.
And
it's a lot of work. You have to be willing to, you know, to sit at wherever, you know, even if you're in the stadium plugged into the one outlet, you have to be able to say, I'm doing this because I have to do it. You know, I want to do it. It's worth it.
And to not do it would leave me feeling even worse.
Oh, it does. I took a year off writing. I told same thing. I, you know, rejection, burned out, and took a year off writing. And at the end of that year, I sort of, the negative energy that was, I sort of vibrated with it. And it took me all that time to realize, oh shit, I need to be writing. This is the only thing. Well, you know, it's interesting. I will wonder, and I hope this is true, that now that people have, you know, discovered When We Were Bright and Beautiful, that you get that some of those old, you know, the big flop, which, you know, again, I'm using your words because it gets some attention, because I do find that sometimes it takes whatever miracle happens for the stars to align and for somebody to get the attention that they deserve, for us to be able to go back and look at those, you know, their earlier works and find them, you know, hit the light again. So that, I hope that's happening.
It is. And when people email me, because as you know, in the polarization, there is some really beautiful notes that I get from psychiatrists and survivors and mothers of survivors. And I never understood it from this perspective. And you said all the hard words. And so I, you know, they're like, oh, I can't wait to read more of your books. And I'm like, oh, well, go to my website, pick one out, and I'll send it to you, because I have, like, especially of the flop, like I've got, you know, 150,000 copies of it. I'm happy to, you know, it's like, so, and, you know, but it's so interesting because my first novel is about eating disorders, right? And maybe it's about a family. I mean, I write family dramas.
Mhm.
And when this book came out, I was like talking to my editor, and I'm like, what about a legal thriller? She's like, no, it's a family drama. I'm like, what about a crime thriller? And she's like, no, it's a family drama. I said, a psychological thriller. She's like, no. But, you know, even when people call it a thriller, it's like, it's not a thriller. I guess there's elements of psychological thriller, but it's
For
like,
sure.
and she was so right though, because people are like, oh, you know, this starts out slow, and it's like, because it's a family drama. You know what I mean? Like, but I forgot what I was talking about, but whatever. It was
Just
about
attention
giving
to
the
your
books away.
yeah, just attention
So,
to your earlier
right.
works, which is, I think that's another thing that is wonderful about being a writer with a long career, is that you never know what's going to happen with the next book, right? You
No.
never know what, you know, where you might, it could be book, you know, 27. But I think if you continue to create, then one book might get, you know, attention, and then people will, you know, some people will go back and discover earlier works, which I think is really fun. Although I sort of cringe, right? Like, I'm like, oh
I
God,
know.
you read
That's
that
like
book?
my third grade, like a third grade story. Oh my God.
Totally.
But you know, at the moment, it was the best I could do at that time, and that makes me proud of it, right?
Exactly.
Like my
And
first
you
book,
get
I know what I was
better.
saying. Yes, of course you get better, unless you're writing the same book, right? And that's okay too. I mean, I don't judge anybody for what they do. It's just, that's not my thing. But in my first book, the narrator is very snarky and kind of bitchy, middle-class family, and people just like can't stand her. And it's like the whole point of the book is that she's depressed. She's a depressed person, right? And so it's so interesting to me, just the like, we like funny people when they're snarky, and you know, Franny in the first book is very snarky, but she's also, you know, she's kind of a bitchy little 23-year-old girl. And it's like, you know, I don't like to see myself, you know.
Right. Well, and I think actually, and unlikable women characters were not a thing until kind of recently, and all of a sudden there's this emergence of where maybe, you know, we're growing in that we're letting women be truer, and some women are not likable, and that's okay. And often they're not likable because they're in pain, right? So,
Absolutely. But it was like, you couldn't have a woman have an affair unless she had a miscarriage, or unless, you know what I mean? Like, unless or there was, you know, a child that died or something, you know what I mean? Otherwise, how do you justify having an affair? Your husband's so nice, like, you know.
Exactly. So, God, isn't that true? I love that truth. That is
so I do think we have evolved, but I also, you know, I think that we have a little bit more to do.
You think?
Yes, I think so.
Just a little bit more to give some women a little more space to sort of, you know, tell their truths. Well, I did think, and actually, you know what, we didn't really talk about the mother character, you know, and I think she is also so fascinating. And you know, there's a little of my mother in her, that sort of, you know, a little bit emotionally distant, and sort of the difficulty of being a young girl with a mother who doesn't, you know, quite know how to sort of embrace who you are, and especially emotion. And I thought it felt very authentic to me, you know. And my mother's going to listen to this and go and read the book and be like, what? I'm not like that mother. But it's true, she's not like that. She's not like that mother completely, but those little bits of you know. And I think if people read your book honestly, and let ourselves sort of feel the discomfort, they will recognize themselves in these characters, because there's nothing about any of the characters that isn't very human, you know. No matter.
Thank you, that's very flattering. Thank you.
I
do feel that there is a lot of reaction to the fact that there's a certain feeling of complicitness, right? And people can't tolerate it, and that's okay. I understand that. But I also feel like the one thing that has characterized every single book I've ever written is that I will go there. Like I will take you
Good for
to
you.
that
Yep.
very difficult place.
Yeah.
In fact, my last, my third book, the big sales, the story was about a stepmother who there's a freak accident at the beach, and she has to decide which she's going to save, either her biological daughter or her stepdaughter.
Mhm.
And one of the editor that bought it said, you know, you went there, like you didn't have a boat come along, and you know what I mean, like you
Mhm.
took us to that place. And
Mhm.
it's largely because I go to that place myself, like
Mhm.
like like these are honest questions that I'm sort of like, well, what would happen if? And I think that makes good
Right.
literature.
It
That makes a
does.
good read.
But it makes us uncomfortable.
Right. It makes us uncomfortable.
We've all had that thought, but I think that's a really it's a really valuable exercise. And I think if we're honest, we're all right there with that mom. We all know
Right.
Instinctively, even though we don't want to say it out loud, what we would do.
Right.
And that's the sort of ugly, scary truth. But I think the complicity argument is interesting, because if you talk to victims or read the accounts from victims, they feel complicit. And so it's not unauthentic to explore that, right? That is what people are going through now. We're trying to work through it, and we're trying to get women to realize, you're not responsible for what happened
Right.
to you. Although the messages are very mixed out in the world, right? So
Right. So that's what I thought was the most compelling thing about my book, in a way, to me, was there's a spectrum of I'm responsible. And so, on one end, there's, I shouldn't have worn that skirt. I shouldn't have gone out that night. I shouldn't, and then on the other, then it gets really to the point where your whole reality fractures.
Right.
Where, and I can honestly say, that I have gone through that. I understand what it's like to not even be sure what happened, and then fill it in with my own hopes and feels and whatever, to say that this is what I'm going to do. This is how I protect myself. And that's how we protect all of ourselves. Is to create an alternate reality in some ways. And I think that is one of the things that I was very, very clear about, that I'm not going to shirk from that. Like, I'm going to go there too, because that's what happens, whether we tell ourselves we should have behaved differently, or we create a whole alternative way of understanding it.
Right. And the way that we put women, on the stand, literally and figuratively, or metaphorically, through the process of, all of those things are true. I mean, and fair, not fair, true and real. And I think it's important to explore that. How, as women, do we learn to sort of, change the way we respond to our own experiences, to other experiences? How do we learn the right language to support victims if we don't look at sort of the ugly, reality of what happens inside their brains and in the media and in other people's minds and everything? And it happens today, you shouldn't have that, you wore that skirt, you were obviously asking for it. And what happens to the women, which I think is another truth, is, especially since the woman who accuses, Billy has been his girlfriend for a long time. So it's also like, if some part of you wanted to kiss that man, does that make you responsible for whatever happened afterwards? It's layered and layered and layered, and it's wonderful. Well, so, okay, before we, I'm sure you have a million things. I could talk to you all day.
Jillian, me too. No, let's just do that. I'll get lunch.
Exactly. So can you tell us a little bit about the committee? Because that's the project you're working on. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's actually, I have 10 pages, and I'm doing something I've never done before, or I haven't done since grad school. I have two writer friends, and we have a little writing group. And I haven't really done this before, but it has been so amazing, because I started the idea I got for the committee, like I don't know, a year and a half ago. And so I also, I just got gripped by it. So this is a true thing. In the 1960s, the first dialysis machines became available. And they were, it's kind of portable dialysis, but not really. So if you needed dialysis, if you're having kidney failure, you had to go to this hospital in Seattle. And they only had room for like 11 patients over 2 years or something like that. So they had they had a committee that decided which of the patients would get the life-sustaining dialysis. But the committee was of lay people. So it was, there was a housewife, a doctor, not a nephrologist, but just another doctor, a pastor, a municipal worker, and a lawyer. And these 8 people came together every week. And this is a true thing. And there was an article in Life magazine that came out about it. And the pastor has since spoken about it, but no, their identities were never revealed. They never talked about it publicly. And I was just really fascinated by that, because you just feel intuitively that it was all men except for the housewife. It was all white. It was like the decisions they made, they thought that they were really trying to figure out what's the value of the patient to society. How do you determine that? And so I said, oh my God, I'm going to breathe life into this committee. I'm going to now I'm looking back at it with a 2022 lens.
Right.
And I'm going to pick from it what I want to do, but I'm really fascinated by this.
Right. Just the weight of that situation without you even infusing any of your breath into it is like, oh my God.
Right.
What an impossible job. And, and of course, when we talk about, how our views of race and gender and a lot of other things and value, like what is value? That sounds amazing. So I love that. Well, we'll be ready to read that the moment it hits the shelves. But
yeah, I'd say about, I don't know, 7 years.
Well, wait, it'll be worth the wait.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, I love that. Well, I have to say, if you haven't read When We Were Bright and Beautiful, it's a must read. I picked it for its beautiful cover. If you haven't seen, this is my like completely ridiculous way of choosing books from Book of the Month. I'm always like, oh, that's a beautiful cover. I'll try that one. And I hadn't heard of it because my especially for the Killer Women podcast, my point is really narrow. Because there's a million books, and if I talk to people who are not writing thrillers, I'd never get anything done other than read. And but there's thriller aspects of this, so it fits in very nicely. And I had to talk to you because I love how honest you are, and I'm not sure I'm brave enough, Jillian, but I really appreciate that you are. And if listeners haven't read it, it is really phenomenal, and I bet it would be incredible as an audiobook too. I mean, I imagine whoever
and
read it.
Marin Ireland did it. And she does all the voice. I mean, she's amazing. But it's funny, I couldn't really listen to it. Can you listen to your own audiobook?
No, God, no. Only to choose a voice. And then I'm like, oh, I hate all the words.
I know, me too. Stop talking.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh wait, I want to edit that word. I want to edit that. Well, anyway, it was fabulous to talk to you, Jillian. And I'm a huge fan. I can't wait to go back now and read all the big reviews and the big flops and the big first deals. So
thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was it just flew by.
I know. I really, Jillian and I
you
could
are
talk.
just amazing. I know you really
so
are.
Sweet. Oh, I love
I'm not being sweet. I just think that you understand the process, and you try to, suss out how all the different writers approach the process, which is infinitely different depending on who you talk to. But you're also really, really genuinely a book fan, and you're just I don't know, you're just really wonderful to talk to. You made it
That's
so easy.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, this has been such a passion project for me. The pandemic and being alone and all that stuff. And, I just realized I love books. I do. In fact, I really love writing, and I'm super happy to be a writer, but it's a toss up as to whether or not I love to read more than I love to write. And I also love women. I'm 50, almost 52. And the older I get, and this is not a male bashing moment, because I have a son and a husband and they're fabulous. But the older I get, the more interested I am in the way women see the world, the way we process things, the way we were told to be when we were younger, especially those of us, in this generation, to be small, to be quiet, to be nice to everybody,
to put other people's feelings ahead of your own. That was a big one for me. I'm 59, and that, oh my God, I still think about that,
I know. And these lessons came largely from, I imagine, our mothers, right?
Oh yeah, right.
It's so, broken and backwards for them too. So, but we get to raise our daughters differently. And I really appreciate it. And thank you for the kudos, because I do love this. And I'm looking forward to many, many more. And I'll be around in 7 years when the next one is ready for me.
Okay.
So everybody, thank you for joining us today on Killer Women Podcast with Jillian Medoff. Go get When We Were Bright and Beautiful. And it sounds like you've got 4 more books we can read. Right. So until next time, bye.
Yes. Bye.